What does free speech mean to you?
Well, what it means to me is that we don't have arbitrary censorship rules on the platform, that Twitter will act as an open town square. It will be an honest referee of the debate, but it will not try to choose winners and losers in the debate. And what we've seen over the past few years is a growing movement towards censorship, where it started with isolated individuals who are sort of unpopular provocateurs like a Milo Yiannopoulos or an Alex Jones. They were deplatformed. Then you had a sitting president of the United States being deplatformed. Then during COVID, we saw entire categories of thought being deplatformed. You couldn't criticize various aspects of where the virus came from, or mask mandates or vaccine policies. And now more recently, we're seeing that same sort of idea of banning entire categories of thought being applied to more and more platforms. For example, dissenting opinion on climate change. So I think basically the censorship has gone way too far, and Elon wants to roll it back. And I think that tweet you showed up on the screen really indicates pretty well where I think he wants to take it, which he does not want to go far beyond what the law allows. So he's not saying that anything goes. The law does not protect, the First Amendment does not protect many kinds of speech, but he doesn't want to go far beyond that in terms of restricting speech. And that is, I think, a healthy correction that's long overdue.
We're actually getting some headlines from Twitter's 8K, which was just filed, getting some more terms of the deal here. I'll read those out as we have them. The first headline, that Twitter required to pay a parent termination fee of $1 billion, presumably if the deal doesn't go through. That's the same as a reverse termination fee. Tim, I'll throw it back to you. What is your definition of free speech? And do you think that Elon Musk can and will protect it?
Well, I think free speech is being used as a proxy for unfettered speech. And I'm actually not a fan of unfettered speech. I don't think propaganda should be allowed to run rampant, and misinformation be allowed to run rampant on social media platforms. And it has. I don't think calling someone like Alex Jones a provocateur really captures the totality of how he's used media platforms. I don't think there are already a lot of categories of speech that aren't permitted on Twitter. Would David be comfortable with pornography being on Twitter, or snuff films, or Russian propaganda, or Chinese propaganda? I think the idea of conflating the notion of free speech with political arguments about left-right censorship is a straw man that's being used to describe a problem that actually doesn't exist to the same extent as misinformation does. And I don't think that Elon Musk has much of interest at all in solving the misinformation problem on Twitter and putting things in place that would allow for responsible vetting, not censoring the left or the right, but actually monitoring the platform so it's a better forum for factual exchanges.
David, I want to let you respond to that. You tweeted that the Berlin Wall of censorship fell, in your words. But are you okay with some of the examples that Tim outlined there?
No, I'm not. I'm not okay with, for example, bots being on the platform, which the platform is absolutely rife with bots. And I think Elon has already promised he's going to crack down on bots. And he has expertise at his disposal, the premier AI engineers who he can deploy to solve that problem. I actually think that Elon's going to make...
But isn't anonymous speech free speech too? Some would argue that.
Not if it's fake speech. So the first, hold on a second. Let me finish. Okay, so first of all, the biggest misnomer, mischaracterization about free speech in general is that it means anything goes. It doesn't. The Supreme Court has basically defined 9 major categories of speech that are not protected by the First Amendment because they're considered to be harmful speech. So, for example, the First Amendment is not a defense to fraud. If you want to defraud somebody, you can't claim that your speech was protected by the First Amendment. When you put bots on Twitter and pretend to be somebody you're not, when you basically violate the authenticity requirement, you are basically perpetrating a kind of fraud. That is not free speech, that's fake speech. It is perfectly fair game under any kind of free speech policy to take down those kinds of bots. And I fully expect that Elon will be far more effective at doing that than the current management of Twitter, because they've been unable to do that. There are many other kinds of speech.
David, tell me what's the mechanism for achieving that, in your view? What's the mechanism for making sure that categories of expression that you think are problematic don't surface on Twitter?
Well, it's not about what I think is problematic. There are tried and true categories of speech that.
What is the methodology for going after any category of expression on the platform that may be problematic?
Well, I'm trying to explain it. I mean, so basically, we have 230 years of Supreme Court case law in which the Supreme Court has wrestled with these issues over decades, not like, some content moderation employees at Twitter who are just figuring this out right now. The Supreme Court's been wrestling with this for hundreds of years, and they've defined 9 categories of speech that are not permitted and not protected under the First Amendment. For example, fighting words under the Chaplinsky decision. Any type of ethnic or racial slur that people could make
as you know, David,
on Twitter. Hold on a second. You could define.
That's about the government.
I understand.
The government oversight of speech. We're talking about a private platform here.
Exactly.
So is your point then that you'll take categories of speech that the government monitors and essentially graft those onto a private platform?
I would take categories of speech that the Supreme Court has already said are not protected because, in their opinion, those categories of speech can be dangerous. And I would then apply similar rules to content moderation. I think that's what Elon is hinting with when he says he will not go far beyond what the law prohibits. So in other words, look, Supreme Court already prohibits fighting words or doesn't protect them. Okay. So, if you're worried about Twitter being a cesspool of ethnic or racial slurs, those can clearly be prohibited under the Chaplinsky decision. If you're worried about harassment or stalking, that can clearly be prohibited. If you're worried about fraud, that can be prohibited. If you're worried about incitement to commit a crime, to commit imminent lawless action, that can be prohibited. Why? Because the First Amendment does not protect those categories of speech. And this whole argument, see, basically what's happening here.
As we're going through this list, what about Chinese or Russian propaganda?
And let's talk about, before you answer, David, Jeff Bezos proposed that the Chinese government just gained some leverage over the global town square, given the strong relationship between Tesla and China. What do you think about that, David?
Well, Twitter has already been allowing the wolf warrior of Beijing and the Ayatollah Khomeini to post on Twitter. They don't seem to have a problem with various governments around the world posting what they think. The problem is when those governments pretend to be someone else. So if the FSB is conducting an operation and created a bunch of phony accounts, that's a form of fraud, and you clearly prohibit that.
That's not the only problem that exists with government-sponsored disinformation and propaganda. Is doing it through bots. Let's get back to the idea.
If you have an account, hold on a second. If you have an account,
are you comfortable with the idea of Russian or Chinese propaganda flourishing on social media platforms?
Twitter already allows them to publish on their platform.
I'm asking you if you're comfortable with that.
Well, look, I think that if a foreign government,
yes or no?
No, hold on a second. It's more complicated than that. If a foreign government wants to have a Twitter account, is it up to David Sachs to say no, they can't have an account? Let them have an account. It will be. Hold on a second. It will be clearly labeled.
Hold on a second.
Hold on a second.
I think it's irrelevant whether it's a government account. I think what's relevant is what the account does.
No, what's relevant is
whether if it's a legitimate government account is spreading misinformation or propaganda.
In whose view? Look, let me just finish my point, okay? It matters a lot who people purport to be on these platforms, okay? If the Russian government wants to post a tweet, or the Chinese government, or the Ayatollahs, if they want to publish a tweet, obviously I probably don't agree with it. It's probably part of their government propaganda, sure. But as long as it's correctly labeled, I don't think anyone's going to be fooled by it. That's really the point. The problem is where you actually have a problem is when you have a disinformation operation conducted by a foreign government where they're posting things under accounts from people that appear to be in Iowa or something, and they are signal boosting with a bunch of bots and fake accounts. Elon will do a better job wiping that out, though he'll get rid of those bots better than the current Twitter management because they've been utterly unable to do it for the last 10 years.
It's not just a bots and a signal boosting problem. That's right. Oversimplifying the nature of the problem.
Well, look, I'm sorry that there are people. I'm sorry there's people in the world who post things that you disagree with. Okay.
Let's talk about Donald Trump before we get to the end of this segment. Tim, obviously, you wrote the book on Trump. He has said he's not going to come back to the platform even if he's allowed. But how significant would it be if Elon Musk and his management team decide to unblock and unban the president?
Well, I think we have to say, what are we doing when anyone is banned and anyone who's banned is brought back in? What are the standards around that? And I think that has to be clarified. I don't think Facebook or YouTube or Twitter has done a very good job of that. I think historically newspapers have tried to address that problem and have found mechanisms for doing that in a real-time basis around categories of expression that involve lying and propaganda and manipulation. It is never going to be perfect, but something has to be in place. It's ridiculous to think that this is a left versus right argument. This is an argument about preserving high quality information in the service of media platforms doing a better job of informing the public. It is no more complex than that.
David,
well, the problem
do you
is,
think that President Trump, David, do you think President Trump should be unbanned even if he is spreading misinformation?
Okay, here's the basic problem. There's no such thing as a truth API. I know you'd like to be able to say, well, oh, that tweet, in my opinion, is false, and therefore we should just ban it. The problem is when you do that, you empower a special class of people. You're empowering these basic mandarins in the content moderation department of these companies to decide what are the boundaries of free speech for all of us, and they should not be in the position to do that. If somebody's willing to sign their name to a tweet, okay, and they are who they purport to be, and it's not in a category of speech that the Supreme Court has already ruled to be harmful, they should be allowed to say it.